Hey everyone, welcome to another quick maths lesson with me, Morale. Today we're looking into tricks to master percentages, whether it's for an exam or everyday life. These tips will help you solve percentages in a matter of a few seconds, right? Okay, let's jump right in. Okay, key vocabulary. Percentages. As we mentioned this before, a percentage is a fraction of 100. So if we're talking about something like 25%, that means it's 25 over 100. That's how we would represent it as a fraction. Increase or decrease basically means finding a percentage of a number to adjust it up or down. So a typical question would be like, an item costs this much and its price has gone up by 25%. How much would it be now? Something of the sort. Or if there's been a sale and the price of this object has gone down by 10%, what's the price of an object now? So finding an increase or a decrease, adjusting the percentage based on that. And then there are a couple of tricks and methods to using this. One of the methods is a multiply method, where you use decimals to quickly find the percentages. We're going to go through all of these together now. Let's look at some examples. Okay, finding a percentage of a number. So for example, find 25% of 200. Now there are two different methods to finding this. One is a multiply method. The other involves finding 10% and then 20% and then 5%, and then finally we add all of them together to find what 25% would be. Let's break them down and look at it step by step. So the first trick would be using the 10%. Let's say the question says 20 instead of 10%. If the question said find 20% of 450, the first thing is we're going to find 10%, and then from that we're going to find 20%. So 10% of 450, in order to find 10% of any number, absolutely any number, we always divide it by 10. So if we do 450 divided by 10, we get 45. So 10% of 450 is 45. Then from there we can say, okay, but the question said 20%, not 10%. So if I double 10%, I get 20%. So if times that by 2. So I'm going to take the amount that represents my 10%, which was 45, and I'm going to multiply that amount by the same number, in this case 2. 45 times 2 is 90. So the step would be find your 10%. If you have a percentage question, the very first step would be find your 10%, and from there we can calculate the rest. If the question says something along the lines of this, find 5% of 200. First, we're still going to do the same thing as before. First, we're going to find what the 10% is. 10% is going to be 200. Remember, we always divide by 10 to find the 10%. Is divided by 200 divided by 10 is 20. To go from 10% to 5%, which is what the question wants us to do, we need to divide 10 by 2. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to divide 20 by 2, and that gives us 10. So 5% of 200 is 10, right? So remember what we said, we always find the 10%, and then we take it from there. So if I go back to the very first example here, it says find 25% of 200. I'm going to find what 10% was, which is 200 divided by 10. That gives me 20. Then I'm going to find what the 20% is. So 20% of 200 would be 20 times by 2, which is 40. Then I'm going to find the 5%. 5% is going to be half of the 10%. So half of 20 is equal to 10. So to find 25%, I'm going to add the 20 and the 5 together. So I add the equivalent numbers 2. And I get 50. So 25% of 200 is equal to 50. That's how you would break it down. So remember, we always find the 10% first because it's easier to do. We always divide it by 10. It's easier to remember as well. 10% just means divide by 10. And then we'll take it from there based on what number is asked of us to find. Now, the third trick here would be finding 1%. So you could get a question that says like this, find 1% of 320. So if I want to find 1%, I can do what we did before, find 10%. Find 10% would be dividing that 320 by 10, which gives me 32. And then from there, I can go ahead and say, okay, I'm dividing it to go from 10% to 1%, I need to divide by 10. So that means I'm going to divide 32 by 10. And remember, if we're dividing a number by 10, the decimal moves backwards. So if the decimal is here, divided by 10 means the decimal moves back there. So it's 3.2. 1% of 320 is 3.2. Now, we found a 10%, and from there we found a 1%. However, notice one thing. We divided by 10 to find a 10%, and then we divided by 10 once again to find the 1%. So, in other words, if we want to find 1% of any number again, we can just divide that number by 100, and that gives us a 1% of the amount. So, but if it's easier to follow this method because you've got a hang of using that method, you can still do it in the same way, so don't worry about that. As long as you know 10%, and then from 10 to go to 1%, you divide by 10. Right. let's look at some examples. Let's do some examples together. So it says find 17% of 240. Okay, first things first, I'm going to find 10%. 10% of 240, I'm going to divide that by 10 and it gives me 24. From there, I'm going to find the 5%, right? Because I'm looking for 17, so 10 plus 5 gives me 15. So I find the 5%, which is half of that, and half of 24, so that's 12. So if I'm dividing that by 2, I'm going to divide that by 2 as well. So got 15% so far, however, I'm looking for 17, so I need to find the 1% as well. So 1% of 240 would be 240 divided by 100, which will give me 2.4. The decimal point is here right now. When you divide by 100, it moves back 2 places, so it's 2.4. So if the 1% is 2.4, I'm looking for 2%, because to go from 15% to 17, I need to have 2%. So then I'm going to multiply this by 2, and it gives me 4.8. Now, to find the total, to get the 17%, I need to add the 10 to the 5 and the 2%. So 10 plus 5 is 15, 15 plus 2 is 17, so I have a total of 17%. So I'm going to add these two numbers together. 24 plus 12 gives me 36. Then I have 36 plus 4.8. Remember, we add it like this. So 8 plus 0 is 8, bring the decimal point down. 6 plus 4 is 10, move it, plus the 1, carry the 1 over, and it's 40.8. So 17% of 240 is 40.8. Now, there's another trick to percentages, and that would be using a multiplier. Now, a multiplier is basically where we convert this into a decimal and then multiply the number by that decimal to find the answer. So what we would do is 72% is the same as 72 over 100. Convert it into a fraction first, and then from a fraction we're going to convert it into a decimal. 72 divided by 100 is 0.72. To find 72% of 350, we convert it into a decimal and multiply the decimal by that number. So 0.72 times 350 will give you the answer, which is equal to 252. Now, a multiplier is a quick way of calculating the percentages. However, it's most suitable for a calculator paper. So if you have a calculator paper, it's easier to do it with this because you just put that into your calculator and you get this answer, as I've just done now. However, if you have a percentage question on a non-calculator paper, it's faster to do it with 10%, then 70%, 1%, and the 2%, and then add them together. The reason being, it's just very common to make a mistake when you're multiplying a decimal number by a normal number. Not impossible to do, and it would take longer. So I would recommend this for a calculator question. Now, let's look at some word problems. Abby buys a sofa for £540. She pays a deposit of 15% and the rest of the money in monthly installment payments of £17. How many monthly payments will Abby need to make? Okay, so first things first, we need to find out what is 15% of 540. So to do that, first we're going to find the 10%. 10% of 540 is 540 divided by 10, which is equal to 54. 5% would then be half of that. So 54 divided by 2, 2 goes into 5 twice, carry the 1 over, 2 goes into 14 7 times, so it's 27. Right, then to find a 15%, we're going to add these two numbers. So 15% is equal to 54 plus 27, which gives us £81. So the deposit she made was £81. To find out how much she had left to pay, we're going to do 540 minus, I'm going to move myself. Let's clear the page so we have more room. So when we do 540 minus the deposit, which was £81, this is what we get. So we cannot subtract 1 from 0. We take 1 from the 4, it becomes 3, and that becomes 10. 10 minus 1 is 9. 3, we cannot subtract 8 from 3, so we take 1 from the 5, that becomes 4, and that becomes 13. 13 minus 8 is equal to 5. 4 minus 0 is 4. So £459 is how much she owes after she's paid the deposit. So there's £459 left to pay, and if she's paying £17 a month, we're going to divide that by 17. Right, 17 goes into 4 0 times, we carry the 4 over, so 17 into 45 goes, so if you write down the 17 times table, 17 times 1 is 17, times 2 is 34, times 5, times 3 is 51, so 17 goes into 45 twice. We have a remainder of 11, which we carry over. So we're looking at how many times does 17 go into 111. So if we carry on with the times table, 17 times 4 is 68, 17 times 5 is 85, 17 times 6 is 102, 17 times 7 is 119. So 17 goes into 119 7 times perfectly without any remainders. So she needs to pay £17 for 27 months to pay off what she owes. Right? Hope that makes sense. Let's keep going. Okay, let's look at another word problem. Amelia and Sophie did a test. The total for the test was 75 marks. Amelia got 56% of the 75 marks. Sophie got 43 out of 75. Who got the highest mark? You must show you're working. Okay, so there are two ways of doing this. We can convert Sophie's mark into percentage, or we can find out what would Amelia's mark be out of the 75. So, since we're looking at percentages, let's do it that way, which I believe is the easiest method for this question. So we want to find out what is 56% of 75. So to do that, first we're going to find out what is 10% of 75. That would be 7.5. Then we need to find out 50 and 5% and 1%. Right? So 50% would be 7.5 times 5. So if we do 75 times 5, we get 5 times 5 is 25, carry the 2, 5 times 7 is 35, plus the 2 is 37. We have one decimal point in, so we go one number in, and it's 37.5. So 37.5 is our 50%. Then to find the 1%, we just take 75 and divide it by 100, so it's 0.75. Then to find the 5%, we half the 10%. So if we do 75 divided by 2, 2 goes into 7 3 times. We got a remainder of 1. 2 goes into 15 7 times. We've reached a decimal point. We will place a decimal point there. Carry the remainder, which is 1. 2 goes into 10 5 times. Now, 75 divided by 2 is 37.5. However, we were dividing 7.5, so we move the decimal point one place over, because there should be another number into decimal, and it becomes 3.75. So to find out what the total percentage is, we add the 50 to the 5 to the 1%. So 37.5 plus 3.75. 0 plus 5 is 5. 5 plus 7 is 12. Carry the 1 over. We bring the decimal point down. 1 plus 7 is 8. 8 plus 3 is 11. We carry the 1 over and it becomes 41.25. We then add the 0.75. I'm going to squeeze that in there. Or I cannot, it seems like. 5 plus 5, again, we carry the 1 over. 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 7 is 10. We carry it over once again, and we've got 42.00. So Amelia got 42 out of the 75 marks. So Sophie got the higher mark, which was 43. That makes sense. Now, so I have a practice question up for you. Try this question and leave your answers in the comments, and I'll get back to you. And that is it. Percentages are easy when you break it down into steps. It might involve a couple of steps, but they're easy to do as long as you write everything down and follow the steps and keep practicing. That's it. Quick and simple ways to master percentages. If you found this to be helpful, please like and subscribe this video for more tips, and see you next time. Happy learning!